you for taking the time to listen to this presentation and say thank you to the organisers of the conference. The work I'll be presenting to you today is entitled The Spectacle of a Ruined Armenian City, Ani Through Controlled Perspectives. So my name is Ella Gok, and this research forms part of my master's thesis, which I'm currently working on. So this is a work in progress. I'm studying at Canterbury University in Istanbul, and I'm part of the Architecture and Urban Studies program there. This presentation and research for the conference has been a collaborative effort between myself and Dr. Ezgi Tuncer. Ezgi is an associate professor at Canterbury University and the director of the master's program in Architecture and Urban Studies. She teaches socio-spatial theories and is engaged in research on migration and displacement, border studies and political philosophy, contemporary art, power and space. Ani, the archaeological ruins of an Armenian medieval city, is situated adjacent to the Turkish and Armenian border and is under control of the Turkish state. Thus, it has been contested and defined by politically motivated restrictions for over a century. This research critically analyzes the 3D scans that have been produced at the site under the authority of the Republic of Turkey's Ministry of Culture and Tourism, placing them within the context of spatial constraints and restrictions on the production of imagery that can be mapped across the site's history. One of these 3D scans, created in partnership with SciArc in 2011, uses LiDAR technology to capture the Church of the Redeemer, one of the most iconic architectural structures from the site. This scan was then made public access in 2020 through Open Heritage 3D, allowing an audience of distant viewers a 360-degree view of the building. This view, however, is incomplete. Void of the context of the site and the reality of the border, the massive points plotted on a Cartesian grid have borders of their own. These are drawn not by geopolitics, but instead by the limits of how far the projected light can travel, parameters in the software, and editing as the multiple scans are combined. Beyond this lack of context, we argue that there is a clear paradox between the apparent objectiveness of an open access 3D scan being produced and disseminated for download with the support of the Turkish nation-state and the historical restrictions at Ani that the state have enforced. These restrictions have included bans on photography at the site and a strict narrative control which has functioned to reduce the acknowledgement of Armenian history through signage and touristic publications. The power that commodifies Ani as a touristic focal point within the region utilizes its control of imagery at the site. As an authority, the Turkish state have historically banned and limited photography at Ani. By contrast, it has taken the 3D image which it promotes and benefits from. We therefore call this paradoxical condition a spectacle, which can be metaphorically explained through the deception of the 3D scan. Zoomed out, we see a dense surface, a tangible structure, but when zoomed in, we find ourselves engulfed by points, not seamlessly connected, but scattered. Spectacle is a clever but misleading tool to cover the truth or to govern public opinion. We argue that as we push for more freedom of information and the sharing of digital data, we should remain critical of the circumstances under which it is collected and produced, and ask how we can ensure digital technologies are not used as tools of power to ban, surveil, control, and govern.
One way my background has fed into this research is that I previously worked as a technician for the 3D scanning department at BMADE, the Bartlett School of Architecture. I'm excited about how accessible many 3D scanning technologies are becoming, such as the introduction of LiDAR to mobile phones and the continuing development of photogrammetry software, much of which is open source, making the production of highly accurate 3D scans more readily available and affordable. I've been inspired by projects such as the Zamani project from the University of Cape Town and more recently Backup Ukraine, who digitise cultural heritage sites that are underdocumented, advocating for better preservation and recording as a tool to monitor damage and destruction. I believe that for cultural heritage sites with problematic pasts or presence, with such situations often being fluid, 3D scanning can become an invaluable tool for the production of evidence, mapping site conditions across time. However, the authorship of this data is critical, and we should be aiming to create equitability of the technology, allowing for the production of scans that are not only captured and disseminated under the permission of the prevailing site authority. This is where tools such as photogrammetry come into their own. Not requiring expensive hardware, they can transform the citizen into the author and empowered evidence collector.
The border is drawn along the natural path of the Arpachai River and has been closed since 1993. Defined by geopolitical lines, it distinctly belongs to the sovereign state of Turkey. However, in terms of cultural heritage and other more intangible forms of connection, the Armenian people, including those located in Armenia and Turkey and the wider diaspora, have an acute interest in the ruins. Ani became the capital of the Armenian kingdom in 961, but is believed to have been inhabited since the 5th century. The Armenians were the first culture to fully convert to Christianity. The remains of many churches and chapels from this period still partially standing on site. Ani then became part of the Byzantine Empire in 1045, and in subsequent years fell into various empires, including the Seljuk, Russian, and Ottoman empires. Evidence from these periods are also visible to visitors. The original excavations of the site took place in the 19th century, whilst Ani was within the borders of the Russian Empire, and were headed by Russian archaeologist Nicholas Marr. In 1920, the site came under Turkish control, first as territory of the Ankara government and then as part of the Turkish Republic, at which point the site was left abandoned, mostly crumbling into the landscape. Its current situation, left in a tenuous state with limited conservation efforts, is considered by many as intentionally orchestrated by the Turkish state, a reflection of Turkey and Armenia's cold diplomatic relationship, as Turkey continues in their denial of the events of 1915 to 1917 through state discourse and censorship. Imagery from within the site can therefore be seen as taking on heightened meaning, a connection to the land for the Armenian people, and as a means of documentation. Ani became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2016, and in recent years the ruins have become an increasingly popular destination for tourists, many arriving via Ankara on the touristic Dwar Express train line.
One of the first spatial constraints we learned about regarding the site, and that was a real driver for starting this research, was from a document archived on the website virtualani.org. Virtual Ani is an independently run web-based archive that since 1999 has been collating and documenting the history of Ani. The site hosts many references from photography and literature to site reports, drawings and maps. So the document I first came across shows us that if you were crossing through the checkpoint to enter Ani in 2004, you would first have to obtain a permit from Turkish officials.
Previous to this, photography was banned on the site, but now you could take photographs as long as you were observing a rule. Do not turn your camera or video recording device towards the Armenian Republic. This rule really led us to question and think critically about how in just under 20 years we have moved from a spatial constraint dictating even the perspective from which photographs could be made to an open access 3D model on one of the most iconic churches of the site being disseminated through the World Monuments Fund. This rule made us consider how physical constraints can have a direct implication on the construction of an image. The significance of this being that our physical interaction with and navigation of space is inherently linked to our perception of our environment. One of the major implications of the rule is that it seems it would have prevented visual acknowledgement of either the situation at the border or Armenia's spatial proximity to the site. Given Armenia's cultural claims to Ani, the framing of the site with Armenian territory as its background could be seen as provocative, a visual reminder of the site's geographical relationship to the country. The rule may also have been due to warnings from Armenian border guards and Russian guards who assist in Armenian border operations. John Mariner wrote in 1967, when visiting Ani, that he was warned by Kar's chief of police, no photographing, absolutely no photographing the Russians, and no waving at the sentries either. They do not like it. Besides, they do not wave back. In 1996, Hegna Wattenpower visited the site as the co-leader of a tour of Ani for the Friends of the American Research Institute in Turkey. She wrote that she was warned repeatedly by Kar's museum employees and the assigned official guide about photography restrictions, and advised that border guards in the Republic of Armenia could fire upon us, although none were visible. This rule would have undoubtedly affected how people acted whilst photographing the site and how they moved themselves to construct their images. Alvin Noe, in his book Action and Perception, refers to this by describing perceiving as a kind of skillful bodily activity. Noah's writing situates the act of viewing within space, our bodies as the vehicles, he states. As perceivers, we are masters of the sort of pattern of sensory motor dependence. This mastery shows itself in the thoughtless automaticity with which we move our eyes, head and body in taking in what is around us. We spontaneously crane our necks, peer, squint, reach for our glasses, or draw near to get a better look. Instructing visitors to not turn your camera or video recording device towards the Armenian Republic would directly impede this skillful bodily activity, and we begin to consider how this would have affected the perception of the space and visual recording of it. The importance of this is that, with limited access to the site for Armenians due to the closed land border, taking photos of the site in the past decades and even beyond the past century has become a critical form of documentation at Ani.
The site has been widely documented through the research of Hegnar Wattenpau, whose article Preserving the Medieval City of Ani, Cultural Heritage Between Contest and Reconciliation provides a detailed account of the history of the site within the context of Turkish and Armenian relations up until contemporary times. Wattenpau provides a sensitive and critical analysis of Ani as a cultural heritage site shaped by politics. We can briefly outline two examples of this role that images played at Ani and how photography has documented the site's spatial restrictions throughout recent history.
In the period between 1875 and 1880, Armenian photographer Ohannes Kirkjian photographed Ani whilst the site was within the Russian Empire. The images captured were stereoscopic and created to be viewed in a lens-based stereoscope viewer, a tool that combines two slightly offset images to create the illusion of a 3D image. These photos are currently in the collection at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam.
Stereoscopic imagery became popular after the Great Exhibition in London, an opportunity to view Orientalist imagery of faraway locations, the mimicking of perspectives creating a more embodied experience. Kirkjian's stereoscopic photographs provided the opposite of this, not depicting an exoticized distant country, but instead capturing a removed homeland, the images being consumed by Armenians living under Ottoman and Russian rule.
There was an inherently spatial dynamic to Kirkjian's work. Not only was the three-dimensionality a powerful way of situating the viewer on site, but the images created a tour, the cards being arranged so that the photographs illustrated an anti-clockwise journey around the city. This highlights how the mimicked perspectives were used as a subversive tool, allowing Armenians who had limited access to the site the opportunity to experience travelling among its ruins.
Although rudimentary by comparison to the three-dimensionality of a 3D scan, the images show a desire to go beyond the static image, to attempt to visually recreate the physicality of the ruins. Kirkjian's use of stereoscopic images can be seen as an attempt to restore a connection to the bodily experience that is not possible for those who are unable to visit the ruins themselves.
Arugula, one of Turkey's most prominent photojournalists, visited the site in 1965 and captured views of the ruins. The site had been under strict military control since it came under Ottoman and then the Turkish Republican rule in the early 1920s.
Gula, who was Turkish Armenian himself, presented Ani through his lens, the work being credited as not only art but as a critical record of the site. These black and white photos are now in the collection of the Smithsonian Institute. I don't have the permission to show them here, but I thought it was critical to mention them as they are a significant part of the history of the image of Ani. They document the ruins, including the Church of the Redeemer, and they have a quality to them that invokes a stillness, shot straight on and void of human presence. Hegnar Wattenpau, who I previously mentioned and has written extensively on Ani, comments on a specific photo of the Church of Tigran Honez, saying, and I'll quote her now, "I found this image very, very poignant, because you have to remember that he is a Turkish Armenian in the difficult period of the 60s, standing, seeing the ruined church of Tigran Honez, and this, of course, the Akyurian or Argchai River that divides the West from the USSR, so Soviet Armenia is just out of reach." In this period of time, when Ani was so restricted to visitors, Gula's lens became a tool for documenting and collecting evidence of not only the physical situation of the ruins, but also a specific moment of these ruins in relation to the situation at the border. Although Gula was able to take these photos, we should again note that photography at the site was difficult during this period and continued to be so until early 2004, when the area became demilitarized. Just to illustrate this, we can remember the permit that was required until 2004, and here on the screen you can see a rough location of the checkpoints for entering Ani and how its proximity has changed to the site over time.
So again, through these examples, I refer to the potential of the image as evidence. Walter Benjamin has famously defined the photographic image within its capacity as evidence, discussing the photographs of deserted Paris streets by Eugene Atze. Quote Benjamin, he wrote of Atze, "It has quite justly been said of him that he photographed them like scenes of a crime. The scene of a crime, too, is deserted. It is photographed for the purpose of establishing evidence." With Atze, Photographs become standard evidence for historical occurrences and acquire hidden political significance. They demand a specific kind of approach. Free-floating contemplation is not appropriate for them. They stir the viewer, who feels challenged by them in a new way. Guller's images have similarities to Atzday's. They are similarly deserted, but also become evident simply for existing when few photographs from this time do. We argue that visual recordings from Annie can be considered evidence, specifically because of restrictions of photography from the 20s onwards and the spatial restraints on site. Various groups have been calling for the conservation of Annie for decades, and in 1996 the archaeological zone of Annie was placed on the inaugural World Monuments Watch. 20 years later, in 2016, Annie officially became a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
The World Monuments Fund partnered with Anadolu Culture in order to conduct its work on site and lists on its website the tools they have used in their conservation efforts, which include panoramic photography, laser scanning, GIS, and environmental monitoring. There is documentation online of 3D scans of multiple buildings on the site, including the Church of St. Gregory, the Mosque of Minachehir, Tigran Honez Church, and Marin Cathedral, which is just 34 kilometers from Annie. These being made in collaboration with the Turkish state and the expert 3D scanning and restoration companies, which include SIOC, Solvitech, and Promet. However, despite in-depth recording and images documenting these scanning projects, the 3D scan of the Church of the Redeemer is the only 3D scan I could locate and has been published online, accessible for the public.
It's undoubtedly through the advocacy of organisations such as World Monuments Fund and Anadolu Culture that Annie is seeing renewed interest in conservation efforts. Anadolu Culture have also worked to improve the involvement of all stakeholders at the site, running workshops to involve locals and particularly Armenian groups. What we are arguing in this research relates to the handling of 3D data, the existence of multiple 3D scans, but the publishing of only one. Published under the state's name, the scan appears as a move with the times, in line with the increasing demand that 3D data of public interest be widely disseminated for viewing and interpretation. But this one scan, released isolated and only with state permissions, becomes a spectacle. We view it within the history of control perspectives of the site and contemporary projections by the state of Annie as a touristic destination, while continuing to degrade Armenian history. But why does the state allow for the publishing of even one scan, and why does power need spectacle or glory? Giorgio Agamben characterizes for us the divine machine of government, defining it as the perpetual coexistence of universal law and business. Agamben details how these are inseparable from each other, plotting their coexistence across the centuries to contemporary times. He argues that today, compared with the cheers and greetings used in the fascist regimes of the 20th century, modern democracies instead employ public opinion. The modern form of glorification is administered, managed, and controlled through the device of the media. The media has become the most powerful weapon through its ability to disseminate and present the magnificence of power. While previously ceremonies were limited, today's media has a capacity to spread such splendor, the spectacle infiltrating all moments of our lives. He presents a government that has become intertwined with the spectacle. Inseparable, they are central to the modern Western power as we know it. Spectacle becomes a tool of power, whose goal is not to govern or action, but instead to nurture a collective inertia. Guy Debord defines the society of spectacle as a final stage of capitalism, where the spectacle has become inseparable from the administration and therefore the economy. In this society, we become only passive spectators, detached from both the ability to know and the power to act. As Jacques Rancière underlines, what one watches in the show is the action that is hidden from oneself. Here, the medium for the spectacle is a 3D scan. We've been allowed to view the point cloud of the ruins remotely. We've been given the position of spectators. This permission, the feeling of being privy to what was unattainable from this distance, legitimizes the spectacle within the agreeable notion of free access to information. However, the 3D scan as spectacle is no longer evidence. A return to action, civilians as the collectors, not as the spectators, can restore this critical role, re-embedding it within this emerging form of imagery from Annie.